can benefit the ecology. So why would we be interested in restoring rivers? Rivers are essentially long, linear ecosystems. And it's extremely important to the life that has evolved in river systems that they're connected from the headwaters to the mouth. And for example, trout like to access different parts of the watershed during different parts of their life cycle. They might prefer to be in smaller streams when they are small and trying to hide out from larger fish and be able to rear and grow and eat. They might want to access smaller streams that are cooler in the summer than the main stem of a river. Fish of different species spawn in different types of habitats. Wildlife also needs to be able to move throughout the watershed and uses river corridors as its highway, essentially. So connectivity is really important in a river. When you think about a river, you think about flow, you think about water moving from one place to another, you think about organic material, woods, leaves, twigs, all that stuff, flows downstream. So rivers in their native state are these long connected ecosystems. What dams do then is they cause blockages that prevent wildlife and fish from accessing the areas that they need at different times of their life cycle. So it changes what was once a long linear ecosystem to a series of small segments. And when you think back to that map I showed first with all those 3,000 dams, and you think about how our rivers have been segmented cumulatively, the impacts of those dams really adds up. So longitudinal connectivity isn't the only thing that's important. The other thing that's really important is lateral connectivity. So the stream is connected to its floodplain, and the things that are going on in the floodplain affect the stream. This is beautiful river habitat here, and you'll notice that it looks really messy. There's trees on the banks that are hanging over. There's branches that are in the stream. There's logs lying down. The log is trapping smaller material. There's pools back here. There's gravel over here. Sand deposited along the margins. It's very active. The stream can access all that habitat in the riparian corridor. And then that riparian corridor, all those trees in turn interact with the stream. And every time there's a flood or stream flow goes up, all this stuff rearranges itself. So it's not only sort of messy, but it's very dynamic. It's constantly changing and shifting. And this is what makes good native river habitat in Massachusetts, in New England, and most of the country. It's this messiness and dynamic nature of the river. And so the native fish and wildlife are all adapted to this type of ecosystem. This is what this is what appeared after the glaciers retreated 11,000 years ago. And until recently, this is how rivers have been. And so this is what the fish and wildlife are adapted to. So how does a dam change this messy ecosystem? This is just my little cartoon illustration. This is the river right here. And the river has river fish. It could be trout, it could be herring, it could be brook lamprey, it could be the bridle shiner, any fish that relies on flowing water. So the dam comes in, and these trout that were heading upstream to their spawning grounds can't get there anymore. And you can see that there's some little yellow particles there floating in the water column. That's sediment that's being transported from upstream, which is part of a natural river process. But with the dam there, it traps it. So the other thing that happens is that because the water behind the dam becomes more stagnant, and the pond often has a greater surface area than the narrow river did, that greater surface area absorbs more solar radiation, and the water heats up. So, and it's that top heated layer of water that goes over the dam and heads on downstream. So dams also contribute to thermal pollution in streams. They raise the temperature, which makes it tough for native river species that are sensitive to that. So that's why one is saying hi. Meanwhile, the sediment deposits. You get a lot of aquatic plants, which are adapted to those types of conditions growing in the pond behind the dam. And you get a different set of fish. You get fish that are adapted to ponds and lakes, as opposed to the native fish that rely on the flowing water of the stream. So the native river fish go elsewhere, and you now have a ponded ecosystem in its place. And they're very happy there. So just to summarize how a dam in general impacts a stream or a river, it blocks the movement of fish and also wildlife like, raccoons, all kinds of wildlife use river corridors to get from place to place. Turtles, salamanders. It warms water temperatures. It traps sediment and nutrients that would otherwise be spread on the floodplain during floods. And it degrades water quality. Those plants that you see there use up dissolved oxygen when they decay. And warm water also can't hold as much dissolved oxygen as cold water. And so what we see in these ponds often is if you take oxygen readings at different levels of the pond, the deeper you go, the less oxygen there is. And in many of these impoundments, the only oxygen, the only water that's really available to most fish is up there at the very top where it's interacting with the atmosphere. So the water quality in general goes down in a pond. And because those sediments there trap nutrients, you get the sort of continuous growth of aquatic plants and algae, which then decomposes and just regrows and decomposes, and the nutrients stay within that pond system. I wanted to say a word on fish ladders. Often when people begin looking at restoring a river, they think about a fish ladder as their first option. And the great thing about a fish ladder is that it can move specific species from one place to another. It's sort of a transport mechanism. The flip side is that putting in a fish ladder doesn't restore those river conditions that were affected by the dam. So it doesn't improve water quality, it doesn't improve the flow of water. The habitat remains the same. The only thing that happens is that you've allowed fish to get into it. And in many circumstances, particularly in the larger ponds and sometimes in smaller ones too, the water quality in the pond is so bad that you really don't want to be getting the fish from downstream into that pond because they can't survive there. So when I work with the Division of Marine Fisheries and we talk about dam removal versus fish ladders, the first thing they do is assess the habitat quality of the pond to see whether it can really support herring or other fish. The other sort of downside to a fish ladder is that fish ladders are built and constructed for a specific species of fish, usually for one species. So it's great at getting that one species from one place to another, but it ignores or isn't able to handle all the other river species or all the other fish species that live in the river also. So it's a great solution if, in certain circumstances, but it doesn't restore the natural river processes. So when you think about the impacts of those dams then, and you look at the map of all the dams in Massachusetts, it's not surprising that when you look at the list of fish that are considered threatened in Massachusetts, it's those species that rely on the flowing river, on the free-flowing streams that are threatened right now in Massachusetts. And so the trout, the herring, and the bridle shiner there are all having a hard time. Okay, so that is a summary of dams in Massachusetts, why they were built, when they were built, how they impact the rivers. And so then the next piece is, what if a community decides it wants to remove a dam? What are the steps to do that? What are the goals for a river restoration project? And there's really 4 things that we think about when we think about river restoration projects and removing these pieces of aging infrastructure. The first one is to protect the infrastructure around it, because most of our dams now have roads on them or near them, or they have buildings next to them, or bike paths or other infrastructure. We want to manage any contaminants that might be in the sediments behind the dam. We want to protect sensitive species that may be in the area. And then as much as possible, the idea really is to get the infrastructure out of the river so that the river can do its own work, so the river can form its own habitat, which is what rivers do. So, how do we do this? These are several pictures of representing the types of data that we collect in a river when planning a river restoration project. In the upper left, that gentleman is in the process of flagging resource areas. We look at the wetlands along the river. We look at the types of habitats that are there currently. He's also, you'll notice there's a foundation of an old mill in back of him. So there's another piece of this that involves looking at the historic and cultural resources at the site and making sure that those are protected. The upper right there, that's someone doing a topo survey of a pond behind a dam. So there's a lot of surveying work that goes into making a map of the dam, the area upstream, the area downstream. Bottom left is a picture of a sediment sampling kit. Because Massachusetts has such a long industrial history, it's very common to find different types of metals and other contaminants in the sediments behind the dam. And there's very strict rules, as is very appropriate for managing these. So sediment testing is one of the first things we always do when we're exploring the possibility of dam removal. And then the lower right is someone from a drill rig, and they were taking a core of the dam to see what it was made of. And many of these dams have multiple layers, where originally it was a timber crib dam, and then 50 years later someone else added a bunch of rock, and then 50 years later there was concrete on top. So it's really important to get a sense of what material you're dealing with so that you can plan the construction appropriately. Then what this shows is this is just a list of the data that we collect. And the data needs are on the left, and then why we collect it is on the right. So I mentioned the topographic survey, the resource area delineation. We look at sediment. We look at the potential impacts of the removal project on other infrastructure in the area, so that we can figure out how to mitigate for that or how to protect that. We look at the amount of flow in the river. We look at what the water levels will be both before the dam is removed and then after the dam is removed, both upstream and downstream. Even though we know most of these dams don't control flooding, it's still important to get a sense of what those water levels are going to be after the dam is removed. We look for sensitive species, and then I mentioned the cultural and historical resources. So dam removal is a very planned activity. It involves a lot of data collection and analysis so that the project can take place in a very thoughtful manner. There's often a concern that people will come in and you'll wake up one morning and the dam will be gone. And the reality is that it takes some time to plan and design. And there's a very extensive permitting process with lots of opportunities for public comment. So when a dam is removed, it's never a surprise to the folks in the area. So how long does it take to do one of these projects? It depends, really, on how complicated the project is and whether you have all the money you need or you're writing grants. But the gist of it is that ideally you'd spend a year collecting data and doing outreach in the area. You'd spend a year in the engineering and design process combined with permitting. And then the following year you would go into construction. And then the fish come back. Then after that you monitor the impacts of the project. So it's a fairly, I'd say, very deliberate, thoughtful kind of process. Not something you can just go into sort of overnight and get done. I'm going to show you some before and after pictures right now. Our program has spent a lot of years planning restoration projects, and we just are getting into a place where a lot of them are coming to fruition. And so it's very exciting for me, and so I'm really pleased to be able to show some of these pictures to you. In this last year, we removed around 7 dams and also did some really neat wetland and river restoration. Next summer, we expect to remove another 7. What's amazing is the transformation that a site can go through even in 6 months. So what I'm going to show you here, this is a combined river and wetland project. This is what it looked like. This was an old cranberry bog, and so the cranberry bog had several layers of sand on top, and the first thing they did during the project was excavate all that sand and to basically bring it down to a floodplain type setting. And this is what it looked like after they excavated the sand. So you can see the area is totally bare. The amazing things about river restoration projects is that there's a native seed bank at the site that just basically bursts out as soon as it's given the opportunity. So this is right after that construction in 2010, last April. And this is the site in August. Now there's a few places where trees were planted. I think you can start to see them right there, there, and there, but there was no seeding done. All of that green that you see is just simply the native wetland seed bank that popped back up as soon as it was given the opportunity. So there's often a concern with restoration projects that the disturbance of the project will have such a large negative impact that will outweigh the benefit. And what we're seeing instead is that there's definitely a disturbance, no doubt about that there's a disturbance, but that disturbance is temporary compared to the long-term benefit. So this site is now on a trajectory to become, a native wetland, where before it was just simply a monoculture of cranberry bog. I'll show you some other projects. This one's down in Wareham, where a series of small dams were removed on a small brook. And you can see, here's the heavy equipment. There's some sandbags here. And there's some stuff sort of slooping into the sandbags. It's very messy to be doing construction around water. But that summer, the banks were buttoned up and everything was planted. They planted a whole bunch of trees there. And then a year later, you really couldn't tell that work had been done at the site. This was one of the first projects. This was done in Plymouth on Town Brook. Town Brook runs right through downtown Plymouth. It goes up to the headwaters are in the Billington Sea, and it's a very, very big herring stream. It also has something like 7 dams on its very short length. The town owns most of them, and so the town was sort of getting saddled with the cost of upkeeping the dams and wanted to look at alternatives. So at one site, they repaired the dam and built a fish ladder, and then they've been working to remove the rest of the dams, and I'll show you some before and afters. The left is the dam. You can see a fish ladder here, and then here's during construction. That's fall of 2002. This is immediately after, also in the fall of 2002. You can see that they've put some fabric down on the bare slopes and they've staked it down. By 2003 in the spring, they seeded it with grass, and you can see the grass is coming back. They used some of the granite from the dam. They built a little trail where the pond was, and they put benches using that granite from the dam. And this is the site in 2004. And if you go there, they have a trail that runs along the river. If you go there, you won't know that there had been a dam there or a pond before. And then this is one of my favorite sites. This is near where I live, up in Rowley. And this was a dam that was falling apart in a wildlife management area. You can see the pond back here behind the dam. And this dam was right at head of tide, and so we were interested in opening it up